Greetings, and we welcome you to this episode of Secondhand Religion. Very happy to be here again, filming another conversation on the faith. That's what secondhand religion really means. We don't come up with the faith ourselves. It's something that's passed down to us, and something that we receive. And so we want to have conversations on the faith with other people that we might continue to pass along the things that we're learning, and the things that God is teaching us, and that He wants to do, continue to do in the church. I'm really excited today to have Emily Vermilya and Teddy Ray with me to talk about pastoring during a time of pandemic, or pastoring in a pandemic. And we've faced this COVID-19 pandemic for a few months now. It's really plagued the world for many months, but here in America, it's really hit us hard over these last few months, and it's created a lot of interesting scenarios for church leaders, for educators, for parents, for work, everyone really. But I wanted to think today about the church, what's happening in the church, how has this affected people in the church, and especially leaders. What are they doing in the face of the pandemic? How are they responding to the pandemic and learning to care for their congregations and leading in worship? So thank you, Emily and Teddy, for being here. Would you mind sharing just a little bit with yourself? Emily, do you mind starting? Just give us a little bit of who you are and some of your background.
Sure. Well, I'm glad to be here. As you said, Jonathan, my name's Emily Vermilya. I serve at College Wesleyan Church in Marion, Indiana, and my role here is serving as the executive pastor. I've been here for just about 14 years now. So,
yeah, great. And Teddy.
You've been there 14 years, Emily. I think I've been at First United Methodist here in Lexington just about the same. I'm at First United Methodist Church, Lexington, Kentucky, working with Jonathan. And I'm the lead pastor of our offerings community, one of 3 different communities at First Church, and then pastor of our new communities and leadership development.
Thank you. Yeah, so Teddy and I, so my full-time job is I'm the professor of worship, assistant professor of worship studies at Asbury Theological Seminary, where Emily is one of our adjunct at the seminary here. And then Teddy is the pastor of the church where my family and I have been part of for the last 13 years ourselves. And I've led music there for that whole time as well. And have loved working with Teddy as part of that community. So this is a nice and meaningful conversation for me with friends and colleagues to talk about this. So as we look at this pandemic, and looking at your work in the church, your role in the church in pastoral leadership, it's been hard. So many things have been thrown up in the air, and so many shifts with having to no longer do in-person gatherings and switch to online or somehow, if it's Facebook Live or Zoom, pre-recorded live stream, whatever that looks like. What have some of your biggest struggles been as in the midst of this pandemic in pastoring, whether that goes into leading worship, designing worship, or just pastoral care, however you want to really think about that?
So first of all, I would just generally say it's been awful. To mince no words, I usually at the beginning of our worship time say something to people about, look, it's not natural. I'm refusing to call it a new normal or to get used to it. Every week, especially Sunday morning, just to walk into a nearly empty sanctuary and lead a worship service without our people there that's not how it's meant to be. I mean, we're meant to be gathered around the Eucharist table, and we're meant to sing together. So there's been a general challenge of not singing with our people, not in any of the same, and really, I would say not just normal, but the right ways, the best ways to be able to worship together. Not seeing people weekly, I just hadn't realized what a gift it is to see our community so consistently, and to know what's happening in their lives. And I'll also say just a kind of a personal challenge. To be entirely honest, I've probably struggled with the question of, am I still doing the right thing being in pastoral ministry more over these past 3 months than ever before? And just kind of a loss of a lot of what I thrived in before. And if you had asked me before, what is it you most love about this? I could have named several things, and some of those have kept on, but not sustained. And I've now just had a few meetings with individuals, pastoral care sort of meetings with people, and walked away from those. And I was like, that's actually where I flourish. Like that is the reason I do all of this, is just that kind of speaking and praying with people over who they are and who God claims them to be. And so that's been especially hard. I think that's been the biggest challenge, is a loss of so much of that.
Yeah, I would completely agree. People are at the heart of what we do. And so that separation from people has been especially challenging. I'll take a little different angle to say that another challenge has been found in perhaps what's been good for my congregation about this. The first few weeks when we went into stay-at-home orders and we were meeting online, not gathering together, I think we were functioning a lot on adrenaline. It was almost like a puzzle that we had to figure out. And so days were filled with a lot of logistical conversations. At the same time, we had this wonderful surge of people from within our congregation who wanted to help. Now, the challenge at first was what they meant is, can I come to the church and be a part of the gathering? That's not really a gathering, but you're all still there making it happen. And the answer, of course, was no, that's not safe, but a willingness to be deployed in pastoral care. So we started handing out lists of names and phone numbers and saying, call each other, check in on these people. Let's love one another in this new way. And that actually has been a really beautiful part of all this. But I think after the first few weeks, once we sort of figured out the rhythm that this was going to put us into, that's when, for me, the sense of mourning really came in. I remember I think it was week 4, going into the sanctuary on Sunday morning and just being really, really sad and feeling this loss. And then it wasn't until the following Sunday, it was the first time. I mean, I can't tell you now, for 20 years, my alarm goes off on Sunday morning and I jump up. This is the day, right? But it was that 5th week when my alarm went off, and I remember just laying there thinking, ugh, okay, I guess we're going to go do this. And so from that time, it's really been a journey of the challenge that I was going to address, I guess, is now it's a question of where is our creativity in the midst of this? And how do we ask ourselves, what do we want to be true of our church when this is over? So I agree. I don't want to accept this as the new norm. But I also don't think that we'll ever know what we knew as normal again. I don't really know to the degree that will be. So really being intentional to say, what do we want to be true of our church when we come to the other side of this, and anchoring ourselves in how do we creatively think outside of the box to make sure that that becomes a part of our DNA now moving forward.
Yeah, thank you. As I've talked with church leaders, one of the things that I've noticed is they've said the difficulty is, how do we, with no people in the room, how do we still have the sense of some kind of engagement, right? With and connectivity on one level, but engagement, on a different level. To say, like, we definitely want to stay connected to each other as a church, and that's important, and that's good. That's a very good thing and very important thing. But in terms of engagement, when we're thinking of worship, one of the things that has been difficult, like a struggle that we've had, is how do we feel like we're not just filming a TV show that people are going to watch, but how are we not filming, but how are we truly worshiping so that people can participate? And so, a few people have said it's really had us rethink our practices of worship right now, to consider how are we fostering more participation, and really garnering more participation from people, whether that's through online means such as commenting and, Facebook comment boxes, or sharing some, somehow do that. But they said it's actually been a blessing, because they may have gotten stuck in some routines or in some models of worship prior that were not good. And so, Emily, you talking about DNA, what is our DNA? How do we carry that through, and how do we come out on the other side of this with something intact, but still something that we can say we want to move into the future rightfully and appropriately? I think it's what they're trying to say too, is now we have this, we want to carry this with our DNA as we move forward. So for them, they said that's been one of the unexpected maybe blessings of having to step back and evaluate things. Maybe not in that extent or to that level, but what are some of the blessings, or whether they're unexpected or maybe they've been a little hidden? It's like this is just starting to reveal itself. What are some of those blessings that have actually come out of this? It's not hopefully all been struggle. Hopefully there's been some kind of blessing in it too.
Yeah, I mean, I mentioned the one that we've seen our congregation re-engage in the acts of pastoral care and caring for one another well, keeping track of one another, making sure needs were met, both for whether it be elderly population or those in need who didn't have food because they're employed in the restaurant industry and it shut down for months on end. I think the other thing that we've really seen is this wonderful opportunity to remind and re-engage the home as the primary discipler, as opposed to the church and the home following along, which no one would ever say that was what you wanted, but that's really probably the habit that we got into. We take our kids to Sunday school, to youth group, and the church teaches them, and then the family comes along and says, well, what did you learn today? And I mean, that's what you were hoping for. And I think in this season, early on, we realized, wow, this is a chance to reorient our families, especially again, to the responsibility that the home plays in discipling. And then the church comes alongside that and supports what's happening in the home. And of course, it's tricky because homes don't all look like neat nuclear teams. And so we've had to wrestle with some things related to that. But I think that's really been an encouraging thing for our congregation, is hearing parents, partly because everybody had more time, they were at home together, but hear of parents especially really being active in having spiritual conversations and teaching spiritual truths to their children.
That's great. Yeah. It sounds like you're further along in some of those conversations, Emily, than we are. We've had some conversations with families who've said, look, online worship, especially on Sunday mornings, as a family is not worshipful. We're trying to corral our kids. We're yelling at our kids during the prayer time. And it really, so it's re-engaged this conversation about, so how do we help families how do we resource them so that they can worship well at home in a way that fits all of those various needs, and even doing some things that are more intentionally designed for the entire family. So that's helpful, especially even as you mentioned, people just being at home so much more. Our family, I complained all last fall that we were never around the dinner table together, and I got my wish. So now it's finding those resources for them. Another blessing for us, it's actually just been, I think a lot of this has been recognizing those things that we truly value most. And we have these catechesis groups, small groups, support groups. And I don't think this is unique to us. I think what I've heard is most churches have had the same experience, that their small groups pretty quickly transitioned online and actually became even more significant spiritual support groups over the last few months. And that's just been really good and encouraging to see, because there are times that I think people otherwise have almost said, yeah, I don't know, this group right now takes a lot of my time, and I don't know that I can give it or that I want to. And we've had some new people engaging in them that frankly probably couldn't have done it in person, especially people with young kids, single parents just were having a really hard time. And now they're able to do it in a way that they're more engaged than before. And that's been great. And it's highlighted for us just, I had not known, and I already mentioned this, I hadn't known how much we as a community valued what you talk about there, engagement, Jonathan. I mean, I think we've always stressed that, and even still, I didn't realize how much we valued it until we were assessing, okay, if we all get together to worship, we can't sing. What does that mean? Is this, and we can't take communion? And are these such high values that without them, we're not going to worship together? We're going to do something else. And so we've, the creative things you talk about, Emily, we've now finally found some creative ways to get together and sing, and actually to distribute communion every single week. It's been interesting, but I think good for us.
Isn't it funny, the things, I know for me, I found early on, there are things I was like, oh, I would never do that. Like, I mean, there's just certain things before all this I would never have considered. And all of a sudden it was like, maybe I will consider that.
Yeah. So for us, I mean, communion went to DoorDash. Like we hit a point that we said our two options are to stop taking communion as a church, or to do it where I literally left a baggie at somebody's front door and sent them a text message. And it was deflating, to be honest. Actually, a lot of the things we've done, a lot of even the creative things we've done, they've been deflating because they're not as good as the normal. But I walked away saying it's not as good, but it's better than not doing it. And so I think that's helped us recognize priorities.
One of the things that I was recently just reading in Augustine in the City of God. He talks about how when something is stripped away from us, we begin to recognize our desire for it. And we have to start thinking, why is it that we desired it? And why do we continue to desire it? And is that a good thing? Is that a bad thing? Has it been something that's been more to the destruction of our soul, or something more to the benefit of our soul, in terms of it connects us to life with God, right? It kind of brings us to union with God. And he says, the good and the bad have things stripped away from it. It doesn't matter. And for the ones that he would call the wicked, or the ignorant, when those things are stripped away, the weak, when those things are stripped away, we long for those, and just for those things, and no greater sense of what they mean and what they point us to, direct us to. We're left more just kind of lamenting our loss, rather than saying, when these things are stripped away, what is the larger, the more supreme good that they served, that they pointed us towards, and how are we more aware of our desires in that way. And so there's really a learning process that happens through that, right? And we begin to learn, why is communion so important to us? Why is singing so important to us? Why is gathering together so important to us? We could take those things for granted, but when it's stripped away, all of a sudden we have to think about them and say, what is it about those things that are so meaningful to us? And why do we value them? And are they worth valuing? And then when we can re-engage them, can we re-engage them in an appropriate way? So, whether it's spiritual things like that, or if it's a more, a personal level, or even it's just like practical, we don't have to go like all Augustine with it. But what are some of the things that you're learning right now? Like I could say, let's just get away from Augustine from it. I've learned how to make videos,
Yeah.
Never done that before, but I'm learning how to edit videos together and put videos together and things. I've been doing that some for some things that we're doing at church. So, everything from Augustine to video making, those types of things. But just anything like that, practical, spiritual, personal, what are some of the things you're learning through this?
Yeah. And you've not just done that and learned how to make a little video. You've done like really good video editing work that people are sending messages about crying as they're watching it. I mean, just to add on to that, you've really you have placed a high priority on our community seeing each other during this time. And so bringing in those videos, so they're not just seeing the three of us who are in the room, but you had both a doxology video and an opening video for Pentecost, where we probably saw 60 different people's faces easily, and that's been so valuable. Yeah. And may even that skill, the video making skill, that we're gonna, even once we're all back in the room together, we're going to have to think about what those particular elements have done long term for who we are and how we worship.
I think one of the things I've learned, which I didn't expect, but we didn't expect any of this. So um, from week one, when decisions started to have to be made and communicated to the congregation, my role is largely behind the scenes in the church, and I execute, what we're doing. I help make sure that we're staying on track. I work with our staff. But I think early on, I learned I was communicating to the congregation a letter every week. And I keep saying, if you told me on March 8th that by this time I was going to have a folder on my computer that was labeled COVID letters, and there was over 20 of them in there, I would have never believed you. But finding my pastoral voice has been a huge thing that I've learned in this season. And I think usually we consider that to be the voice that you find either through the pulpit, through preaching, or in care situations when we sit with those who are in crisis or grieving. And that's all true. But what was interesting to me was finding my voice with our congregation through faithful weekly correspondence. And in week 2, recognizing that while they needed me to communicate information, we all need information right now, and it's very confusing what's going on. They needed a pastoral word first to sort of frame, okay, this logistical information matters, but not as much as just staying rooted and anchored in the body and in Jesus Christ. And so that was something that at first my pastor, encouraged me in. And at first I thought, well, we'll give this a shot. But what I found is that, there have been a couple of weeks here recently where it's like, there's nothing new to communicate. We're still waiting, but there's still importance to sending a word because people have come to rely on the faithfulness of that communication, and just giving people a window into what I'm learning and how I'm growing, walking through the very same days that they are.
That's great. Just the learning to communicate with your people in a different way, and in a way that's stabilizing, consistent right now in the midst of a lot else that varies. It's a good point. I talked about Jonathan's creativity. I didn't talk about anything I've learned, just what Jonathan's learned. We had talked about streaming. I'm in awe of. It seems like darn near every church found a way to stream within 2 weeks. And I'm still really proud of us that we figured it out in that amount of time, because I felt like it was a big deal, but maybe it's not, because everybody else figured it out too. But I'm glad that we learned it, and it's that's one of those things that's going to carry on long past this, and learned a ton through it. So because the nature of preaching online, I think it's just so much harder to keep people's focus. There's that extra distance. And so I've been focusing a decent bit more on what are the visuals that I'm using during, like, it's not an optional or just very occasional piece. It's got to be more regular, and still living into that. I mean, a lot of it's just been quotes, but it's something that someone can look at on the screen. And I've turned our screens there in person into teleprompters, so that I can be looking near the camera when I'm reading my notes instead of looking down. And I don't know how that translates long term yet, but it's been just an interesting process short term.
It's been good. It's been fun watching from the back, when you're doing that. But it is nice. I think that's it's been a good thing. And it's weird that you have to keep in mind, usually we're thinking of the people in the room and how are we engaged them. We read the room. When you don't have that, even for me, for music, you don't have that to kind of read, and the energy there, and knowing, like, did this joke land, or did this point connect, or whatever. But also just in terms of presence, and that's one of the things that I find to be kind of difficult is my presence there. I feel like I have to try to keep a different kind of presence for a camera than I do for people that are in the room. It's like I can be, I don't know, like I don't even know the right word for it, because I've not thought this through a whole lot. But there's a different presence in the room where I can just be comfortable and I can be there and we can be together and I'm just leading. But when it's on the camera, it's like, I feel like I have to like amp things up, another few levels. So it has to be even more, I think we feel this in Zoom meetings too. It's like when you want to agree with somebody, you can't just be like, it's gotta be, yes, you have to kind of exaggerate. And so it just feels strange for that. But, in the back of my head, I have, this is to help engage, so Teddy, just thinking through teleprompter, part of that is so that you're not looking like this the whole time, but you can be looking like this, because there's a big difference when it comes to camera. And so it's just really interesting and hard in its own ways to make that shift,
There's been a lot of relearning. I think I was thinking about, we've been doing live streaming on Sunday mornings. And our senior pastor has pretty much preached each week through this. In part, at the beginning, was just feeling that need for consistent presence amidst so much uncertainty. And then we came to a week where he was like, I need a break. And so I got tossed the ball for that Sunday. And it was kind of funny, although now it's funny. It wasn't funny at the time. At 4:00 on Saturday afternoon, our technical director called me and said, hey, we've got real problems with the internet signal at the church. So we need to record the service tonight so that we can make sure we can get it out tomorrow. So basically you have an hour to get to the church. So run over to the church, we do this service, we record it. It was the only time in all this that we recorded it. Of course, it was the week I was up. And what was so good about that, what I learned though, was I remember years and years ago, when I was leading worship every week, someone advising me that the most important thing I could do, or one of the most important things I could do, was take a week every so often to sit in the congregation and to experience what our people were experiencing, as opposed to just always being up in front and seeing it from one perspective. So Sunday morning was the first time, I think, in 20 years that I wasn't on vacation, that I was at home on a Sunday morning, and my family was going to gather and watch the service like they've done for all these weeks. And I wasn't going to watch it. I was like, I don't want to see myself preach, and my husband was like, nah, you need to experience this because this is what we're doing every week. You're going, but you should experience this. So I said, okay, I'm going to do this. And it was fascinating to me for that very same reason of, it was really important to sit and go, wow, this is what our people are experiencing every week at home. And to take what was learned, for our entire team to take what was learned, and on Monday morning, get back on Zoom and say, okay, wait, what do we have to switch now? Because it's funny how from one side of that camera, or when there's nobody else in the room and you don't have that feedback, what you're not interpreting through the same lens that your congregation is.
Yeah, that's a good word. Yeah. And it's so funny because I know exactly what you're talking about in terms of kind of being able to sit back and not be leading the whole time and see it, but I've not really thought about that in terms of online. That's a really good point. Yeah, that's good. Yeah, so a lot of people are working on with regulations lightening up some, and people able to gather in groups again. There's slow reopenings of churches happening right now. Any practical advice, and a lot of people are having conversation on this from, depending on what kind of denomination or tradition you're in, at district levels or conference levels or assembly levels or local levels, regional levels, as well as, within the church itself. So there's some of those things to navigate, and I'm not trying to say like, well, don't pay attention to those and just do your own thing, but just saying, as you all are working on thinking through reopening and coming back together in person, what are some things that maybe either are really important for you that you're trying to keep in front of you, just a few things, or maybe one or two practical things that you can give to a pastor that's maybe struggling to say, I'm trying to figure this out and I don't know what to do right now, and I don't have a lot of dialogue partners. I'd love to hear some advice right now. Anything that you can offer there.
So I don't know that I would go so far as the only advice that I think I would universally give is no slogans. Like, if your rationale for what you're doing fits on a bumper sticker, you haven't thought through this enough, because there are just so many things going on. And I think we need to listen to all of them and take them all into account. And so it's just not as simplistic as I've seen some people make it, both the case for opening or the case for remaining totally online or whatever. Um, I'll speak more to just kind of my mindset through it, which has been, I don't believe that our government authorities or our denominational authorities have malicious intent. And I do believe that generally they, at a big, broad level, are able to spend more time talking to the experts they need to than I am. And so I'm going to listen to them, and I'm not going to actively disobey them. So if they set minimum guidelines, I feel a responsibility to follow those. Once they've set those minimum guidelines based on all the expertise they have around them, and just because there are authorities who are trying to do what's best. And look, I think we may get to the other end of this and look at some of the regulations they set and say, those were bad. I'm fine saying that they don't have all the answers. I'm just saying right now, I'm still going to obey them and trust that they probably have more experts around them than I do around me. And then beyond that, for me, it's been important to say it is not a small deal to deny our people the opportunity to worship together. And I take that really seriously. Or to be together in Christian community in any way. And so within the guidelines that our authorities have set, I've wanted to be, I would almost say, aggressive and creative. And maybe instead of aggressive, I should just say quick, to, within the bounds given to us, to offer our people whatever opportunity we can. That to me, that was the DoorDash communion thing, was like, hey, we still believe in communion. We believe this is a grace to our people. Is there a way to do this without disobeying our authorities? And we found this little tiny hole for it. And now as it's starting to open up, we gathered and we sang outdoors with masks on from 10 feet apart from each other and took communion this past Sunday. And to be honest, it was in a lot of ways really deflating, because you could almost not hear the people around you singing. But I walked away from it saying it was better than if we didn't do it. And so right now we're going to call it a win, but we're also going to call it first fruits of hopefully something better coming soon. So.
Yeah, I agree with, we've had a little interesting, different situation here in Indiana, in that our governor released a phased plan for how things are reopening. That's pretty common. But at the last second, much to our surprise, sort of flung open wide the gate for churches and said, but none of this applies to churches. Y'all can do whatever you want to do. So some people were cheering probably, and other people were like, what does this mean now? It was interesting because in the beginning of the crisis, when we were looking for guidance, do we close? Is this smart? What's going on? It was a blessing on a Thursday afternoon when our governor suddenly said, no gatherings of larger than 250 people. And for our congregation, that was, okay, well, we can't gather. We're bigger than that. And so there was some guidance given to us. But in this regathering process, it's really been more of a free-for-all, and there's been lots of a spirit of competition. I think it's been challenging. Well, that church is opening, why aren't you? Or some comments about this is a faith issue, and you don't have faith to regather. We've still not regathered. But one of the biggest blessings to me in this, and I think you addressed it, Jonathan, I'm in a congregational model. The local body has a lot of authority in and of itself. And so for a few days after the governor had made this pronouncement, my senior pastor and I were wrestling with this. What do we do? What's the right thing? And trying to figure it out. And then all of a sudden we realized, wait a minute, this is a decision that impacts our congregation, and our congregation elects a local board of administration to act and guide in matters of congregational issue. And so I said, what, we don't make this decision. We walk with our local board to make this decision. And what we found there, it's the proverb that talks about the wise are advised by multitude of counselors. And what we found was this group of people had all sorts of perspectives, be it from the science world, be it from healthcare and geriatric perspective, all kinds of things that we would have never ourselves thought to process in all of this. And so I just have found myself really grateful for the reminder of the body and how we do this together. I know there are people in our church who are not pleased with our decisions thus far, but by and large, I think we've been able to communicate. Just because you can do something doesn't mean you should. What we have to take into account, what every church has to take into account, or every district or whatever, is what's best for their people. And every church is going to look a little bit different. I mean, there are churches, we have a sister church here in our community that's largely not white and largely African American. And they said, look, the rates are higher for people of color. We're going to choose not to meet right now. Well, they have very different reasons for that than my congregation that has a very high elderly population involved in it. So I think what's important is that we are together listening to the Spirit, and that we're unified with those who have been called to lead the church in supporting. We've been using the line around here, we can disagree, but we have to cooperate.
It's a good line. It's a really good line.
It's a lot lately we use it.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. Yeah, I'm going to remember that one. That's very good. So, one of the things, whether it's faith, all the stuff that we've talked about, we've talked about the struggles, we've talked about the blessings, we've talked about some of the things that we've learned, and then how we're slowly going into reopening. And one of the things that I've heard, you all have heard articulated many times, is seminary didn't teach me this, how to handle this. Seminary didn't teach this to me. I know Teddy and I've talked about it a little bit. I think, I'll toss it to you here in a second. He's got a great response to that. But, we do have resources still. It's we have good books, good resources, whether it's websites, books, whatever, podcasts, things like that. So I just wonder if you could name one, two, whatever, some things that you find really important, whether it has to do with, a pandemic or ministry in general, a pandemic and how to do ministry within it, or if it's just worship, ministry, pastoring in general, that you think, it really doesn't matter if you're in a pandemic or not, this is good to go to. But not ignoring you, Emily, I just have talked about this with Teddy, so I'll toss it to him first and then have you respond. But Teddy, first, your response to that statement, they didn't teach us this in seminary, and then second, any kind of resources or books that you would suggest.
Right. They didn't teach us this in seminary it's such an easy fallback for like, hey, how come you didn't teach me this? How come there was no test about what you do if there's a state of emergency declared on Thursday? Like, of course, seminary didn't teach us this, and we shouldn't expect it to. But at the same time, I think seminary did prepare us for this theologically in the ways that we should expect of seminary, which is it taught us ecclesiology, or it should have, right? If it didn't, I think then you can properly say seminary didn't prepare me for this. But the way that seminary should have prepared us is by teaching us ecclesiology, like who is the church? And that means when suddenly the way that you plan to worship on Sunday has just radically changed, and what your small groups do and look like, and your mission and outreach all change, you go back to, well, what is the church? Because some of these things are going to change, but can we still be the church? I think like learning about the sacraments and saying, so what is our understanding of the sacraments? We've seen that come out about as much as anything. Like, should we do online communion? Well, seminary did equip you for that, hopefully, because it taught you about what we believe about the sacraments. And so for me, I had to learn a lot of stuff about how to do a Facebook Live. And what in the world to do when I can't see my people regularly. And that's been real and hard. But seminary equipped us with the theological tools. And so I'd urge people to, several years ago at a conference, somebody said, for every how-to book you read, you need to read at least 2 books on theology. And I thought it was a great statement that really reshaped things for me. And the only disagreement I have with it now is I think that ratio is way off. I think it should be like 10-1. But like, I think people they need to go and read about who the church is meant to be. And that shapes a ton of this.
Yeah, I kind of had a two-pronged approach to what I was reading. It's not nearly as academic as all of this, but early on, when people were so uh, afraid and not really understanding what was going on, and I was sensing getting a lot of responses from people about, they weren't saying poor us, but isn't this terrible? And honestly, I was feeling that. I might not have been saying it, but I was feeling it. I took a lot of solace reading Bonhoeffer's Life Together again and recognizing, okay, let's put this into perspective. In the days that Teddy mentioned before, where I thought, what is the point of pastoring right now? Like, where is my role in all of this mess? Revisiting Eugene Peterson's The Pastor was hugely devotional in nature to me. And I think just in terms of perspective, which has been huge in this, it's been a really great season for me to reconnect with some of my friends in ministry globally. And I'm specifically thinking of a few friends in Africa. And to put into perspective what stay-at-home orders mean for me and people in my community versus people who are in communities that are just fraught with challenges every day, then you put this on top of it. That was kind of like a medicine almost. I didn't enjoy it necessarily, but I think it was something God was using and reminding me to check in regularly to keep my own perspective about this is hard and there are challenges, but to keep looking, as you asked us, Jonathan, early on, for what's the good that's coming out of this too.
That's great. And you've just reminded, I should go pick up Eugene Peterson. That would be the perfect book to pick up right now.
Just encouraging.
Yeah, and again, reminding you, so what is pastoral ministry? And there's a way to think of it creatively in this time, even if it's not exactly the same.
That's wonderful. Thank you. Yeah, thank you so much for those resources and thoughts on that. Life Together is definitely, I've heard that come up so many times, and I think it is so pertinent. That is right. That is a wonderful book. So I would put that at the top of the lists for people, for pastors especially. I'd put that for clergy and laity alike, especially for pastors. Look at Eugene Peterson there. Another one that came out for me, which, anybody that knows me is not going to be any surprise, but is Robert Webber's Worship is a Verb. And to say, and again, laity, clergy alike, it doesn't matter, to read that and say, what is worship? And even thinking about the church, although you can go to his Common Roots for that, to think, what is the church? How do we understand the church historically and what it means for today, and then worship and spirituality and all these different things. But worship is a verb because it really hones in on principles of worship, and to say, the principles don't change, the principles stay. And how do we begin to think through these principles? It might be our methods right now have to change, or our way of engaging and stuff is changing some, but we want to cling to these principles. We still want to keep these central, the narrative aspects, the participatory aspects, these things that he's really hammering in on. The arts, how do the arts come into worship, in different ways, and we can utilize those well and engage people. So I'd say, it's a fine book to read, and to apply, say, like, take those principles and say, even if you're looking at online for right now, or distance gathering or whatever, how do you still keep these principles before you? So those are the ones that I would toss out there.
Mm-hmm. Great. Yeah.
Well, thank you both so much for being part of this wonderful conversation. Really do hope that there's been, there's been so many good things you've said. I know there's a lot to glean from here. So hope it can be a blessing for those that watch this. And we look forward to talking to you and talking to you all again. I'd love to have you again sometime to talk about some things, but look forward to future episodes as well. So God bless, and talk to you later.
Thank you, Tom.
Thank you.